We're ready now for our official session 1, which is going to be chaired by Simon Harper. The session is Accessibility Challenges. So Simon, if you want to come.
Okay, I have a technical paper, full technical paper for the first one from IBM, and Vagner is going to present it. Oh.
Good morning, my name is Vagner Santana. I'm from IBM Research, and I'm going to present a paper entitled Identifying Challenges and Opportunities in Computer-Based Vocational Training for Low-Income Communities of People with Intellectual Disabilities. I know it's a really long title, but just keep in mind the vocational training, low-income, and intellectual disability. I think that's why we try to incorporate those aspects, and then the title gets big. But this is just an agenda. I'll present about the background and motivation of the project, then the related work, the goals of this specific study, details of the study, and final couple of recommendations and final remarks. Related to the project, this is part of a long-term project which involves educational platform, which is designed from the very beginning to consider multiple types of media so that it could cope with multiple presentations modes, and in such a way that is also nonlinear. So it allows multiple ways of interacting with these multiple modalities. Andrea is going to present a demo about EVA, so please take a time to take a look at it later on. Related to employment of people with disabilities. In this specific scenario, we identified a number of forces related to this specific subject. And we have inclusive workforce to consider autonomy and self-esteem of the people employed. From the side of organizations, they may got tax incentives, also laws considering that fact, and also we have qualification, qualification challenges to match employees and the workplaces, and also assistive technologies. In the literature, we got support for related to improving skills, considering perception, attention, memory, reading and writing, and considering specifically vocational training. There are works considering the vocational matching, training using 3D printables, using mobile devices, virtual reality, and also assisting employees in the workplace. And what we did find as a gap was to understand better the details relating or details talking about the whole in-class dynamic of people with intellectual disabilities. So the goal of this specific work was to identify key requirements for the vocational platform I mentioned in the very beginning, and requirements related to intellectual disabilities. And as a collateral, we got some really interesting data related to vocational training for low-income communities. And the contribution we're going to present is a snapshot of the current computer-based vocational training in an NGO, which is it's our partner back in São Paulo, Brazil. And a list of recommendations, and I'm going to present a couple of examples relating to those recommendations, but we have all the details and of the observations in the paper. First, a little bit about this study. The study was grounded on user-centered design and universal design. The idea was to place the user in the center of the whole process, considering UCD, and in such a way that it respects capabilities without discrimination. What we did, me and Rodrigo, we've been during 3 classes in this NGO to observe how people with intellectual disabilities were acting during these vocational training sessions. And these 3 classes counted on 23 students with intellectual disabilities. The first one with 7, the second one with 10, and third one with 6. Instructor led these classes, and during the classes we took notes, and at the end of each session we had an instructor interview to clarify some aspects and to get some specific information regarding the whole in-class dynamics. About the institution, is called APAI de São Paulo, which is the Association of Parents and Friends of People with Intellectual Disabilities. It is located at São Paulo and is a research partner from since 2014. It provides educational support, vocational training, and rehabilitation therapy. And one aspect that is important to highlight, that they follow the concept of support employment. And the idea is to first place the people with intellectual disability and try to make a match related to a specific position, and then train that person. Regarding the place where we performed these observations was the telecenter, which is an information technology classroom where they teach basic IT for people with intellectual disabilities, and that's the main focus of this place. It's a room with 15 desktops using Linux operating system. I'll return to this information later on. And they also provide 4 desktops for the local community. Regarding the instructors, we had 2 instructors, one 31 years old man with 7 years of experience in teaching IT, 3 of them for students with intellectual disabilities. Instructor 2, she was a 36 years old woman with 10 years of experience teaching IT, 5 of them for people with intellectual disabilities. Related to the classes, I'm going to give some highlights of the 3 classes and the 3 sessions we observed. I'm not going to go deep in every single details. But the first one, we had 7 students, 16 to 25 years old, 6 of them with Down syndrome, and the remaining, and the other one has another type of intellectual disabilities. Related to this specific information, the institution we visited has limited resources, so it is not easy for them to specifically identify each type of intellectual disabilities. The focus of them is to support the community, and sometimes they don't have enough resources or enough personnel to go deep into the identification. But they said to us that the focus is to support the way that the community needs, and the way they can support the community. That's the basic idea. And at this class, it was interesting to observe that for most of them was the first contact with computers. And instructor 1 led this class, and the goal was just to get them familiar with basic features of Writer. So they use the OpenOffice Writer. And the activities they perform, there's a list and details, but it's just, the idea was to get them used to interact with letters, with the alphabet. And they had an approach back there to show first letters all in capital, and they explained that the idea is to get them to provide them autonomy and recognizing letters, to consider bus signs and also traffic signs and this kind of stuff that they said that they needed first, try to get home by themselves, identifying the bus signs and addresses and so on. And then they start to type using their profiles to get used to read and write their own information, and then to work with accents, that in Portuguese is really common to have lots of words with accents, and we love it. And then they start to write small paragraphs of text. And there was a transition from text all in capitals to the regular capitalization. And also they were taught how to save the work done using their own names. So the students were getting used to use their own names to save the work done. One thing that we observed, and was interesting, that they had different paces at this specific class. There was that they had different capacities, and it was self-paced approach followed by the instructor. I will just go through the next classes, and then I return to specific cases when I present the recommendations. The class 2, 10 students, 3 with Down syndrome. They were working, they're already placed in the 2 companies. And the goal was to teach basic features of OpenOffice. The activities were involved to identify the abstractions related to lines and columns and so on. The approach that the instructor followed these was the instructor led, which we mean that for each activity performed, the instructor went to each of the workstations to verify if everyone was at the same pace. The class 3, with 6 students, all again with intellectual disabilities, and the goal here was also to identify, to learn basic features from OpenOffice, and the instructor draw on the blackboard every single feature from the OpenOffice calc, and start to teaching how to use and how to use, for example, for a shopping list. After the observations and after the interviews, we identify a couple of recommendations that we thought it would be key for even applying the platform we are working on at this specific scenario. And the first one is to adapt information systems according to in-class context of use. Because there was a platform they use on a daily basis to learn how to interact with mouse, keyboard, and also with puzzle games. But they mentioned that it is hard to customize to specific tasks they want to teach. For example, to change the picture from the Eiffel Tower to the Ibirapuera Park, which is a really beautiful place back in São Paulo. The second one, support multiple cases, because they start learning about how to interact with written text, all in capitals. So why we couldn't use this approach in such systems to make these transitions also in the information systems that they are using? The third one is to reduce information load. This is not new, but this appeared in a very interesting context in which they used, the alphabet that they were typing was covered by a second, they were using a rule with the alphabet and a second piece of paper with just a hole to reduce the information load considering the alphabet, so that they could see one letter at a time and focus on one letter at a time. The next one, provide awareness and status. This was interesting also to identify because, as I said, when the practice were instructor-led, the instructor had to go to each of the workstations to get to identify if everything was okay with that specific student, if he was doing well. And one thing that identifies that the class layout, I mean, how the chairs are in relation to the blackboard where the teacher was an issue, because he was not able to see every single display at the same time. And sometimes the students that were seated in a place that the display was not in the field of vision of the teacher, the instructor, then these students were commonly behind, a pace behind, because they were not at the instructor's eyes. Also, we identify interesting situations considering peer support, because usually the friend next to you is also doing the same exercise at the same pace, and usually they got to see each other's display just to get, okay, I'm in the right pace. Okay, did it right? Yes, I'm right. So that is, we thought, okay, why wouldn't we couldn't think about a system that could provide this type of support? And another situation is about repurposing mainstream ICTs, like WhatsApp, YouTube, Facebook. They urge to use YouTube and Facebook after the classes. They try to finish faster the exercise so that they can have free time for using those kind of information. So why don't you use them during the class? Why don't you, we could use them. We could use as a part of the whole process. And bridge the gap between context of use. And this was interesting related to how because sometimes teachers lost or use more time to explain such any feature because they were considering, okay, this is an open office feature, and back at your workplace you're going to use Excel, Microsoft Excel. So that is a little bit different, and sometimes this generate noise during the communication and during the learning, the whole learning process. So this is one thing that we could have in mind during this kind of session. The final remarks. The requirements that we identify is not, they are non-exhaustive. So we identify key elements that we thought that they could speed the process. They provide valuable experience about understanding. This was a really interesting experience. And the two things that we identified, that heterogeneous knowledge level led to self-paced style, and homogeneous led to instructor-led, where the instructor had to be with all students, and that is a problem that this is not scalable. The key requirement that we identified is awareness, and the future work we're planning is to work on repurposing ICTs to provide awareness to the instructor. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Yeah, sure.
I read your paper beforehand, and I got the impression that the peer review, the peer support was higher than in a normal education system. And if that's the case, do you have anything to say about how these children were exceptional?
I don't see as different from the regular education, but we identifying different patterns of communication, like people with Down syndrome tend to interact more with people with Down syndrome. And the interesting thing we saw was that sometimes the communication between peers or with the teacher could be improved by considering their specific characteristics. For some students, they were urging to ask for help, but they were not comfortable asking in front of everybody. So when the instructor stopped by and asked, is everything okay? Is everything okay? And then the student said, okay, I'm not doing that right. I'm not getting I'm not getting this right. Can you help me? And then the instructor helped them or her. But I think this is the biggest difference we identify. The way that they sometimes get uncomfortable by asking help to the instructor, and that's why we thought about the awareness as a critic aspect. Because if you have all displays at the instructor site, and also using WhatsApp, for example, to notify the teachers, okay, I'm in trouble, or I'm in trouble now, I'm not getting this done. Could you help me? Just because they use this kind of technology, and that could bridge the gap between the way that the support they need and the support they are comfortable doing.
Yes.
Hi there, Erin Bueller from UMBC. Thank you for your talk, I really appreciate it. It's a subject near and dear to my heart. I was curious if you noticed differences in the efficacy of peer-led versus instructor-led learning in terms of the students with intellectual disability and their perceived self-esteem. Because as you said in the beginning, one of the factors that impacts a person with disabilities being employment also has to do with their own self-esteem and their perception of themselves. So did you see a difference between peer interaction learning and instructor-led learning?
That's a great question. And in the beginning, we thought that about trying to understand better which approach would be better at that specific context. And we identified that it depends a lot on the knowledge level of the students, and also the approach that instructor uses during the class. And depends on the content. So what we did identify that was interesting that one of the instructors mentioned that at the beginning, when they're trying to learn how to interact with IT, they start in a self-paced way. And they mentioned that for some students, they evolve well using this approach, and usually they got into more specific classes, like teaching how to use electronic spreadsheet, and so on. But they also mentioned that some students, they stay longer during this exercise with the alphabet and getting used to write texts, and to later on get any way of learning how to read and to write well. So basics has to do with the knowledge level of the class. And for the self-paced classes, all students were already employed. So the instructors also mentioned that once they are employed, they have a better awareness of having things done in a group, as a group. So, okay, I know I'm working on a specific place. I know that there are rules. I know that, okay, this is an exercise I'm doing step by step, so let's do it together. And they mentioned that this comes also when with the idea, the approach that they use of supported employment. They employ it first and then continues to provide vocational training for them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, for our second paper today, this is a communication paper that will be presented by David Sloan from the Paciello Group.
Thanks very much, Simon. Yes, I'm David Sloan. I'm not Sarah Lewthwaite. Sarah did the majority of the work in this project and will continue to do so. I'm a kind of interested observer and semi-participant. So we're going to talk about the approach to teaching accessibility. You've heard this morning about the importance of designing inclusive learning systems. We've heard a little bit about teaching people with disabilities, and I'm focusing more on the effectiveness of teaching accessibility. Accessibility knowledge is increasingly important. Accessibility knowledge and skills is something that the technology industry demands. We've seen that in a couple of recent initiatives. The Teach Access project. Can I have a show of hands? How many people here have heard of or are involved in Teach Access? Just 3 or 4. Very briefly, Teach Access is a consortium of technology companies, including Yahoo, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, a few other major tech companies, plus disability advocacy organizations and higher ed institutions. And it's really aimed at raising the importance of accessibility knowledge and skills in graduates entering the technology industry, to emphasize the importance of needing accessibility skills. And then we've had professional certification in accessibility. The International Association of Accessibility Professionals have launched an accreditation scheme. So as a professional working in the field of accessibility, there is now a qualification you can take. So clearly, the value of accessibility knowledge is growing. And accessibility, as everyone in the room I think will agree with, is a fairly unique blend of technical skills and a social understanding of the wider human rights initiative that drives the need to use technology to reduce social exclusion. So it's a very interesting mix of technology and people. And all of this brings a sort of unique challenge to how we teach accessibility. Can I also have a show of hands for how many people in the audience are actually teaching accessibility at various levels here? Again, probably I would say maybe about 5 or 6, so maybe about 20% of us. So that's an interesting observation. Those of you who do teach accessibility will probably be acutely aware of the unique challenges that you face in trying to engage and successfully convey and support the acquisition of skills and knowledge. And there's been a lot of discussion on what subjects that we teach when we're trying to teach accessibility to different audiences, but I'm focused on the question of how to teach accessibility in this short talk. And to do that, Sarah and I have been thinking about the sort of study of pedagogy, how do we learn how to teach more effectively? And in order to do that, we reference this concept of pedagogical content knowledge, this idea that people collaboratively engaged in teaching a particular subject can gather, generate and share knowledge on effective ways of teaching that subject. And we were interested in figuring out what do we know about how to teach accessibility, and specifically in computing science. And this obviously presents a very fine or sort of small focus on the work we're doing, but we wanted to run a short literature review of what we knew, what was out there in terms of methods of teaching accessibility. So we did a search of the Web of Science database using a very specific string to search for papers that should focus on accessibility and teaching. We found 23 papers, 3 introductions to thematic sessions at conferences, 2 posters, and 1 PhD thesis from Paul Bowman, who now works at DQ. We did an initial analysis of the themes that are emerging from those papers, following a sort of, once we'd thrown out all the papers that weren't relevant to the particular area of study. And we found some interesting early findings. And again, I should stress this is a fairly early stage of this particular project. Firstly, the literature is very small. There aren't that many papers out there that describe studies aimed at evaluating the effectiveness of methods for teaching accessibility. And they tend to be dominated by first-person reflections. Teachers, such as perhaps some people in the audience, who are talking about what they did to teach accessibility. And it may well have been very effective, very successful, but as we know in science, one data point demands a replication of that study to see if those findings can be replicated and transferred to different contexts and situations. Initial themes include things like focusing and using tools and standards to construct teaching around, whether it's encouraging people to use evaluation tools, as Chris Bailey did in his work a few years ago, using evaluation tools as a prompt to help people learn about accessibility, or focusing on standards such as WCAG as a prompt for learning. Focusing on problem or project-based learning, so rather than just talking at people about guidelines and standards, getting people to integrate accessibility learning into project-based work. So develop a website and integrate accessibility into the development work and the evaluation work and in HCI or related topics. That was another theme that emerged. And talking about HCI, a lot of the papers, or some of the papers we found would talk about how we effectively integrate learning about the needs of people with disabilities into human-computer interaction as a topic of study. And then the question of raising empathy in computing science, you may find that there's a dominance of thinking that everybody is like a young male, highly educated, technologically very literate person, so everyone else is like that, so we don't need to worry about other people. So the question of raising empathy for diversity is something that people writing about teaching accessibility focused on. And involving people with disabilities in the educational process as a way of raising empathy, but also getting much more accurate data on the current situation and how we can improve things in terms of technology design. So ultimately, there's a fairly limited published pedagogical content knowledge. The knowledge may exist, but it's not apparent in publications. So we don't really have yet a significant pedagogical culture for accessibility, a culture where we exchange and share ideas, that we evaluate ideas or approaches that others have proposed to test them in different situations. So as we move forward and think about trying to solidify and build this level of knowledge in how we teach accessibility, we've got a number of challenges that we need to face, not least the changing nature of accessibility as technology emerges, as all the research that we've heard about already and that we'll continue to hear about over the next 2 days brings new discoveries to the field, new tools, new ways to support people in achieving different tasks and objectives, then the nature of the accessibility we teach will change. The visibility of accessibility in the curriculum is also a challenge, particularly this question of whether we integrate accessibility into all stages of the design and development process, or do we teach it as a specialism, as something that we need to teach as something visible. But the downside of that is that it's standalone rather than having this direct embedded relationship with all of the activities that we undertake when we're creating digital resources and tools. And then there's a problem with focusing on standards, which can inhibit the way that pedagogy evolves. If we decide to focus all of our teaching on, for example, teaching guidelines and standards, then there's an assumption that those guidelines and standards that's all we need to learn, and it's just pointing people to standards and guidelines without thinking more creatively about helping people learn. And just because we have this limited discussion, there's this sort of circular problem. As long as we don't have a sharing of knowledge, then we're not going to be able to grow our understanding. So just making people aware of the wider focus on pedagogy and evolving our understanding requires some effort, requires us to think about reflecting on the way that we teach, the effectiveness of the way that we teach, so that other people can learn and build and improve on those approaches. So, sort of finishing off, if we agree that we want to build a pedagogical culture in accessibility, then those of us who are involved in teaching or are thinking of being involved in teaching, need to engage more effectively with literature on pedagogy, on effective ways of teaching, learning how to design and evaluate learning experiences and share those with our peers so that we can collectively build on them. We want to be talking more, we want to be discussing more. There's a very strong focus on research, especially in higher education, and I'm speaking as somebody who left that field 3 years ago. There's a strong focus on research attainment and less so in teaching attainment, but can we try and create a better discussion? Can we have rewards for people who teach accessibility more effectively? And can we diversify the space in which we have those discussions, move things out of research papers and into blogs and social media? So next steps for our work, a deeper thematic analysis of the literature that we found, trying to maintain a living collection of the literature so that you can all, and everyone else who's interested, can look at that literature and say, well, you've missed some papers, here's something I've written that's really important. And potentially build that. At the minute, there's a URL which is on the slides for those of you who can see it, but it's also in the paper. There is a reference there at the minute, but we want to build it into something that people can potentially contribute to. So thoughts on how we can do that would be very welcome. And just talking more about how we can share and document effective teaching methods for accessibility. It's something that I think is a wider conversation for us and people outside of the conference to think about. And there's a project I recently noticed that started up at Rochester Institute of Technology. If anyone's here and is involved in that in terms of assessing methods for teaching the subject of accessibility, I'd love to talk to you about that. So, thank you very much.
Okay, questions? Okay, well, I have quite a few.
I hoped you would.
So, I noticed on these, on paper, on the kind of breakdown of the papers, there wasn't very much about the social commercial aspects of teaching in the pedagogy. So, we normally... Pardon? I don't have them. Okay, so I noticed that there wasn't really a breakdown of us teaching the commercial value of accessibility. It seems to be more like it's a good thing to do, or we should do this for access. But did you see any papers where it was talking about commercial value of accessibility and providing accessible resources in the teaching material?
The easy answer to that question on commercial value of accessibility is to say that may emerge in our deeper thematic analysis of the papers. So I wouldn't like to speak with too much authority on the frequency that was mentioned in the papers we found, but I suspect it will be there. I mean, it's in there as part of motivation. You know, are raising. There's a sort of link between empathy and motivation. You know, how do we make students want to learn this topic? I guess, you know, stepping away from the literature that we looked at, the existence of things like Teach Access, where you've got people like Facebook and Yahoo saying, we want to employ or graduates who have accessibility skills as a core professional skill rather than something that we will only look for when we're looking to recruit an accessibility specialist. So, yes, I mean, it's maybe something that will emerge in a deeper analysis.
Any questions? Yes.
Hi, I am Rodrigo from the University of Laiola in Switzerland. This is more like a general question. So before we have heard that accessibility is a joint effort and that everyone should be part of it, and not only content web developers but also content authors, etc. So I was thinking, what are your thoughts about teaching accessibility in other fields like communication degrees or, for instance, in translation faculties, society, etc. And if you have found any papers on that as well, not only computer science.
Well, the answer to the question specifically on teaching accessibility in other subjects, we deliberately focused on searching computing science related papers for this particular research study, but I totally agree with you that accessibility needs to move beyond computing science. When we think about people who work in accessibility now and the proportion of those people who did a degree in computing science, it's pretty small, and we can't expect people to generate accessible digital content and accessible digital tools to have gone through a traditional computing science education. So I would strongly agree that yes, it should be a core digital literacy that every student learns, whether high school or beyond. Widen the base of people who have at least a very small understanding of accessibility, and then build that to a pyramid where there's specialists at the top. But yes, maybe we could repeat this by searching other publications from other topics.
Any more questions? Got time for one more? Okay, well, I've got one. And it's actually related to, so mine is just related to this last point that you made. Do you think we need to broaden our understanding of what accessibility is to make it more relevant to more people, so they can see that it should be part of a general purpose kind of knowledge, as opposed to this specialist thing that people seem to think it doesn't really matter?
So redefining accessibility, I think I have two opposing answers. One is I think it's a great idea because designing for as many of our target audience as possible is what we're after, and that just, if we can just assume that includes people with diverse abilities, and that we're not thinking about some aspect of normal users and then people who have accessibility needs somewhere else. That's important, but at the same time, I'm always troubled by sort of almost making accessibility disappear as a concept, because it stops people thinking about the fact that some of our users can't see the screen, some of our users can't use a mouse to interact with the screen, some of our users will want to change the display or whatever. So there is a tension between making it disappear and making it just good practice, and teaching accessibility as good practice as just the thing you do, and also making people aware enough that this is not something you can sacrifice for some other objective when it comes to when there's a tension. So it's, I guess we've got a lot of thinking to do still there.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, I want to demo a bit. So.
Okay, so for our final presentation this session, do not panic. Everybody will get your lunch with plenty of time, so it's fine. We've got an hour and a half. Don't panic. Don't panic.
Close the doors now. Is there?
Not anybody in. Okay, so Volker is going to talk to us about MathJax.
Thank you very much. So my name is Volker Sorge. I'm an academic at the University of Birmingham in the UK. I'm also running a small company called Progressive Accessibility Solutions, where you concentrate exclusively on STEM accessibility. And I'm here as a member of the MathJax Consortium, which is a project that's being sponsored for many years by the American Math Society and many other sponsors, including a lot of publishers. And this is joint work with my colleagues at the MathJax Consortium, Cervone and Peter Krautzberger, and I'm talking about a project which has been supported by the Sloan Foundation over the last year. So I'm through with all the sponsors now, and I'll dive into what this is all about. And I don't really have to motivate very much, because I'm very grateful to two of our IBM award winners this morning who already have motivated my work. So I think it was Ashley and Philbert who kind of were talking about the problems they had with online mathematics. And in many ways, I'm trying to give at least part of the solution, and maybe more of the future solution. Right, so let me just very briefly kind of motivate again. So math is hard, right? If you can't see the math, it's even harder. Online math is, again, hard. And probably online math, if you can't see it, is the hardest problem, right? And that's what we're trying to solve. And that's what we're trying to solve in MathJax, which is normally a visual rendering solution for mathematics on the web. And I'm going to give you a bit more overview of what MathJax is in a little while. And for now, I'm going to concentrate very briefly on telling you about the state of math and its accessibility on the web, which is fairly sad. First of all, MathML is supposedly the representation language for mathematics on the web. It's part of the HTML5 standard. Unfortunately, it doesn't really help you very much if you have your MathML, because it can't be rendered in most browsers, because there are not very many browsers actually supporting MathML. That is obviously part of a problem with the browser vendors, but also one reason is that MathML spec is seriously outdated, and it's kind of incompatible with much of what we now have in HTML5 and CSS. And I know this is a controversial position, and I'm sure I'm going to get some flack for it, and I can see Sam over there already looking at me. Anyway, so as a consequence, what's the consequence? Most of math out there is actually given in traditional formats, which are primarily LaTeX, but also ASCII math, which is the kind of simplified version of LaTeX, and instead of MathML. And that means that you need a specialist rendering solution, and that also means that web accessibility is a difficult beast. So you have a couple of tools for where you contain web accessibility out of the box. So Chromebox, a couple of years ago, I was invited by Rahman to join Google for a while, and we implemented MathML accessibility and MathJax accessibility in Chromebox. And there's some support in VoiceOver on Safari, and then there's some support via external libraries like MathPlayer, and also with the help of MathJax in NVDA and JAWS, for instance. Problem is that you normally have to install yet another tool just to get math going. And there's a lot of people are actually reluctant to do this. That's what we find out more and more. Right. Right, where does MathJax come in? MathJax is kind of what used to be a polyfill solution for mathematics. Polyfill solutions normally are there in order to keep compatibility of browsers up to a standard which kind of is in accordance to new specs which haven't been implemented in all browsers yet. And then polyfill solutions should go away. Now the problem with MathJax is it didn't go away, it became part of the problem. It was so good in many ways that it rendered everything so nicely. The